So we're talking about life in America after World War II and a little bit of post-war politics. Is not a very long lecture, only a couple slides, and then I'll get one for section 3 out to you as well. So life in America after World War II, potential problems that existed as you know, the economy makes that transition from a wartime economy to a peacetime economy. You know, all those different transitions that happened. We talked about this a little bit first semester when we talked about World War I. But potential problems. There's a little bit of a law in the economy as factories kind of had to lay off some workers, most of them women and Black Americans, because there wasn't a need to you know, satisfy the war production needs. You're also, you know, encompassing about 12 million men and women who are returning from, you know, parts of Japan, parts of Europe after the war itself, and try to, you know, reintroduce them to civilian life. Many of them, you know, came right out of high school, went right into the war, and then came back. In addition to that, as I mentioned before, you had women working in predominantly male-dominated industries for, you know, the last 2-3 years, and men coming back, you know, were expecting their jobs back. So you had to make a lot of different adjustments as you know, you start to get out of that wartime life into more of a regular peacetime type of life. One of the ways to make that transition for GIs to come back, GIs meaning soldiers, GI stands for government issue. There was a GI Bill that was passed in 1944. So they had kind of already been working on potentially making that readjustment before the war actually even ended. And the GI Bill basically was aimed at making the transition in civilian life more smooth. And so it provided things such as job training, loans to attend college, things of that sort for men and women coming back from you know, various parts of the war. It also, those who didn't have any desire to return and go to college, it also provided loans for buying a home or buying a farm or starting a business. These are super low interest loans that had very small monthly payback, so that, you know, these individuals could come back and kind of get reintroduced to civilian life. It also would provide opportunities for those who couldn't find jobs through unemployment benefits and things of that sort. In addition to that, you had a huge increase in birth rate throughout the 1950s and 60s. Sometimes we refer to them as the baby boomers. Your grandma and grandpas, and maybe some of your parents, if your parents are a little older, could have been part of the baby boomer. That's usually about if they were born in the late 1940s all the way through maybe early 60s, 62, 63, 64, somewhere in there. And so that put a huge demand on a lot of different industries, housing being one, teachers being another. There's a big need for teachers throughout the mid to late 1960s because of the amount of families you know, that were having, you know, 4, 5, 6. I mean, I came from a family of 8, and that was not unheard of. I remember I had a friend down the street from me who they had 12 kids in their family, and I mean biological kids. I'm not talking about, you know, married, you know, couples getting together that also had kids from other marriages. There was also a sharp increase in labor unions and activity of labor unions. A lot of the labor unions, you know, kind of said, all right, we're out of the wartime situation. We don't have to make these concessions to ownership about wage increases and hours working, those type of demands. Now we want, you know, to be kind of compensated for the sacrifices that workers made during the war. And so there was a lot of labor strife, strikes, you know, based on hourly wages and working conditions, amount of hours that they were required to work, those type of things. Like I mentioned, labor unions kind of put that stuff to the side during the war, to kind of in the effort of providing help for the war. But now that the war is over, it's like, all right, now we got to go back to, what is normalcy. 1946 midterm elections are huge. We talked about midterm elections in the past. The fact that the Republicans gained control of Congress, you got to realize Roosevelt was a Democrat, and he was elected in 1932. And he was elected in 32, in 36, in 1940, in 1944, and then he dies in office, and then Truman takes over, obviously a Democrat. So the Democrats have controlled Congress for the better part of almost 15 years. So when the midterms come about and congressmen and representatives are being elected, the Republicans gain a lot of ground that the Democrats had been enjoying through much of the late 30s and through the early 1940s. (1948) presidential election, the first election after the war. You had Truman's popularity as the president who had taken over. So technically, he's the incumbent president at this point. He was not popular towards the end of the war for various reasons. Not towards the end of the war, I'm sorry, towards the end of his term, 1946, 47, 48, like I mentioned, all the problems with making that transition to from a wartime to a peacetime economy, and things didn't go necessarily great. You also had that separation from the Southern Democrats, sometimes referred to as the Dixiecrats, who were part of the Democratic Party, but yet didn't really see eye to eye with the Northern Democrats, and specifically on the issues of civil rights. And so they kind of broke away from the Democratic Party and kind of formed their own little faction of Democrats led by Strom Thurmond. The Republican candidate was Thomas Dewey, who was from New York. So obviously you're talking about a state that has a large population, at least New York City, and was the clear favorite to win the election. And as the election kind of gets going, it looks like it's a pretty simple and easy count, but it goes into a situation where Dewey thinks he's going to win the election hands down. You can see the picture there. President Truman is holding a paper that is the Chicago Daily Tribune, and the headline says "Dewey defeats Truman," and that was a missed little step by the paper. They had gone by projections, thinking that Truman was going to win the election. Dewey was going to win the election, but once the votes were tabulated, they made the count, it was found out that Truman actually did win the election. So when they went to bed at night, the paper printed off the headline saying Dewey defeats Truman. When they woke up the next morning, they found out, oops, we miscounted or didn't count enough, and Dewey ends up winning a very close election. You can see in terms of the number of states won. The blue states were won by Truman. So you see a lot of blue states, but again, you got to realize that in the western portion of these states, especially in these areas right here, there are not a lot of electoral votes available there. And the red states were won by Dewey. You can see the Northeast, Michigan, and then random states here and there. The green states were won by that Dixiecrat candidate, Strom Thurmond. So relatively even election as it works towards electoral votes, but Truman does win the right amount, and he wins the election. All right, so let's just real quick, section 2, and I have this posted for you, the lecture outline, and I'll send copies down to the copy center. Hopefully somebody can pick those up for me and get them to you by tomorrow morning. Otherwise, you have to take your notes on Google Classroom. Remember, you have all of the assignments posted for chapter 15. And I'll be back on Thursday for sure. Doctor ordered me to stay out 3 days. So obviously today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. So I'll be back on Thursday. And then we'll tie up any loose ends that might have occurred when I get back on Thursday.